Very good evening to you. It's Gene from Avstar Observatory. Wanted to just go through a few facts for you guys, starting with temperature. But before we do, as usual, just want to say a big thank you to the few people that have been sorting us out with a little bit of donation. Also want to thank our patrons as well. And you know what? We also should thank those people like Kendall and Scott in Arizona that are sending us regular data so that we can update the website and continue with our archive of data, not just from here in the UK but from other locations around the world. So all of you deserve a pat on the shoulder for what you're doing. And if I can just encourage a few others to join in and help us, we can help inform other people about these anomalies that are taking place that undoubtedly will affect our lives. So I want to begin with these two temperature charts. The one on the left is what is being used to drive global warming, and of course they start with a date from the 1880s up to 2020, and then the one on the right obviously is 2000 years of record temperature. And you will see that on the right, around 2000, was still not as warm as what we was nearly 1200 years ago, around the medieval warm period. The big point is here, first of all, the one on the left doesn't cover the Industrial Revolution, because the Industrial Revolution began around 1760, whereas that one starts at 1880. And you can see why they've chose that date, because I've drew the two red lines on both of the temperature charts. You can see at the beginning of 1880 I've drew a red line all the way down there, and then I've marked 1880 on the right hand chart, and you can see why they have chose to select 1880 as the begin date, because from 1880 the temperature goes up and continues to go up, and we can see that it does that on the right. The only difference is the temperature chart on the right shows the medieval warm period, and that was 1200 years ago, and certainly a lot longer than the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which began in 1760. So clearly there is cherry picking going on. What they are saying with regards to CO2 is nonsense, because if from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution we have been pumping CO2 into the atmosphere, and that is what's led to global warming, then how did the CO2 and temperatures rise before the medieval warm period? What was the driver of that? These are the questions that are being failed to be answered by these climate scientists that support global warming. A lot of the reasons for this is because there are organisations putting pressure on these scientists to support global warming in order to tax people trillions of pounds globally. This isn't no longer just related to one country. The burden has been put on the global community, and this has arrived from the United Nations. They're the ones that have got it completely wrong. They're the ones that are saying sea level rises are definitely taking place, yet they choose to measure it from the absolute wrong place on the earth. Where we should be measuring sea level rises or falls would be on the equatorial region, and they're not measuring those at those regions. They're measuring them from different countries around the world. A lot of them are being measured in Europe, so you're not going to get accurate readings. A lot of the other things is when we look at these islands in the Pacific, we see that they appear to be sinking. But what could be another reason for these islands sinking, or what they're saying is that the sea levels are rising that much that, you know, they're dwarfing the islands now, and it's making it impossible for the you know, the residents of these countries that live on these islands. It's making it almost impossible for them to live there, because, you know, when they have high tides, you know, it virtually engulfs the whole island. It's making it almost impossible for these people to live on there. But they do not talk about the fact that those islands could be supported by a plate. When we talk about plate tectonics, it could be supported by a plate that is in a subduction zone, and therefore it may appear that the sea levels are rising, but what's actually happening is the subduction zone is dragging that island underneath the water, and of course it would make it look like the island was being engulfed by rising sea levels. It's not the case. You know, these are the lies that we have to you know, sort out from the truths and the facts. And it's not just this. Temperature charts that show the truth of the matter and make it very difficult for these scientists that are supporting global warming. They never want to talk about the medieval warm period. Full stop. They'll completely admit it, and you can see why they do that, because they've got to answer the question, what drove temperatures up to that point? Because it certainly wasn't the Industrial Revolution. And, you know, the further we go back into the history, the further we see that, you know, the population numbers get smaller and smaller. So, you know, it can't be humans that are driving up temperatures that spiked at the medieval warm period. There must be other factors involved. You know, if we go back 12,000 years, and another thing that they don't want to talk about is the 100,000 year cycle. I'll just go and show you what we're talking about with that. So this is another chart that, you know, these climate scientists don't want to talk about, but we can clearly see there has been 5 occasions, including the previous time that we're in right now, where we have experienced interglacial periods. But they are short-lived. They last, you know, between 12 and 15,000 years, and then for, you know, 95 or so thousand years we go back into what is known as a glacial period. And these are different from ice ages. What glacial periods do are cover most of the northern and southern hemispheres of our planet in ice, thick ice that becomes glaciers, and that's why it's called the glacial period. So, you know, we can see there is a nice cycle of 100,000 years. Again, they don't like charts like this, because what we see happening is temperature rising before we see a CO2 rise. So what their argument is that CO2 rises and temperature follows. But it's not the truth. You can clearly see which one rises first. Temperature rises, then CO2 does. And when our oceans and land warms up even just slightly, it starts to emit CO2 that is stored in the oceans and the land. Now, I've talked about this before. You know, we have at the moment what I like to call a trace gas, which is CO2 in our atmosphere. It only makes up 0.4%. Let me show you. So as you can see on the left, the blue pie chart, we can just see a very thin sliver at the 12 o'clock mark on there, and it measures 0.4%. That's how much CO2 we have in our atmosphere. Now, when we go to the right hand pie chart, the red one, we can see out of the total amount of CO2 that is you know, in our atmosphere, how much exactly is man-made CO2. And out of that 0.4%, we can see that man emits 0.012%. It's nothing. Our input is negligible compared to the oceans that emit CO2 and the land, which is the biggest reservoirs or stored CO2 on our planet. And naturally, the CO2 is emitted far greater, as you can see there, by natural occurrences as opposed to man, and therefore, you know, it weakens, you know, the United Nations argument in support of global warming with regards to the amount that humans are emitting. The reason why they're doing this shouldn't come as any surprise to you. It is simply to extract tax money for false reasons. Now, there isn't a single published paper or scientifically reviewed paper that has been accepted that CO2 is responsible for global warming. That should come as a massive surprise. Yet, on the back of the United Nations declaring that CO2 is the villain in our atmosphere and causing global warming, they have managed to raise trillions and trillions of pounds and, you know, bribe scientists to support their theory. Can you believe that? This is where we are in the state of play at the moment. Talk about, like I have in the last two videos, that, you know, it's down to you to make the decision on whether you want to move from the vulnerable area that you might be in now. And that people said to me in the comment section, well, people can't do that because they can't afford to. Well, if they can't afford to move right now out of harm's way or out of a dangerous region where it's earthquake prone, then maybe the value of their loved ones is not as much as what it is to stay in that vulnerable area. You see, we are convincing ourselves that at all costs, you know, we must continue paying and living where we are. But if I had a crystal ball and I showed somebody that had probably fell to, you know, some terrible disaster in 6 months' time and lost, you know, perhaps a couple of his children or maybe even his wife, and I said to you, you could have avoided that by, you know, selling up now and moving to a safer location, I bet you he would, if given the opportunity to see his fate in the future, he would do that now. But it's very difficult for people to make these choices, to make these decisions now. And, you know, if they are persistently going to stay in a dangerous region and use the excuse that they can't afford to move, then they are already accepting the fact that what we've just talked about could be a reality, and, you know, it is more important for them to live where they are than to protect their loved ones. And, you know, I think that needs to be given a lot of thought by a lot of the people that view these videos that we're doing, because what we're trying to say to you is, come on, you know, are possessions worth more than your partner, or more than your kids, or more than your loved ones? And if sorry, if the answer is no, then you have to act now. You've got the opportunity to do that. But if you're going to wait around for, you know, one of these events to catch up with you and your luck runs out, then you've got to face the consequences. So, you know, I'll try and talk to you guys like you're adults, and you can accept the truth. And that's the truth. You know, if you're prepared to stay in a region in the world somewhere, wherever it is, in an earthquake prone you know, area, you know, in the footpath of possibly a volcano erupting and lava pouring through your living room, or you're in Tornado Alley, or, you know, you're in a flood zone, then I really don't have, and I know this might sound harsh, but I don't have a lot of pity for you, because you've been given, if you have watched these last few videos, you have been given a heads up of what you should do. But if you fail to do it, it's on your own hands. You know, I don't want to see you. That's why I showed that photograph of that woman holding the other person, because obviously she knows exactly what I'm talking about now, because she probably very, very luckily avoided death in that earthquake in Peru, and she probably has lost all of her possessions that she's worked her entire life for, she may well have lost loved ones as well. And what I'm trying to do is prevent you being in that situation. You know, I'm saying to you, you definitely have options right now which you can take. But if you fail to take them, then you've got to take responsibility for your inactions. And if you do find yourself in the future crying because you've lost, you know, everything you've worked for, you've lost perhaps loved ones, you know what? It was your decision. And I say it again, you know, I treat you like an adult, not like the government treats you, because we've seen exactly the response of the government that takes taxpayers' money off them. You know, we've seen exactly the levels of assistance they've given in crises, and they're not worth nothing. That's why, you know, I say to people, you know what, take out an insurance policy that you can spend once and it can last you, you know, 20 years. You know, what we're talking about is a few provisions that you can put up in a bug-out bag and just grab that bag in case, you know, you find yourself in emergency. You know how many people still haven't done that? You'd be surprised. Absolutely surprised. You know, with the climate increasing in the frequency of these events, these disasters, with the frequency of these earthquakes occurring at larger magnitudes, with the occurrence of tornadoes causing more destruction and wiping out, you know, small towns, you know, with all these disasters on the increase, you think that people would, you know, take matters into their own hands and safeguard themselves a little bit more with a bug-out bag or some provisions, bit of food, whatever, than what they are doing right now. You know, I listened to, like I said the other day, Gerald Celente and Peter Schiff. You know what? Two guys that have been right about the economy up to this point. Gerald Celente's been right on so many things. You know, a lot of people follow him for his predictions and his trends with regards to the economic situation globally. And all I can say is, you know, if you know at some point that we are going into a depression, I'm not talking about a recession, those are mild, we're talking about a depression. If we're going into a depression and you haven't got no food storage right now, or you haven't, you know, had a bit of foresight to say, you know what, we need to move our investments out of, you know, just one pot now, we need to spread our assets about. If you've not took those decisions right now and you know we're heading into a depression, you know what, you're just standing on the track waiting for the train to hit you, because you should be able to by now see the train on the track heading towards you and realise that you're standing on it. You know, I can talk about these things, I can deliver the facts and the evidence to some of these anomalies that we follow here at the Mafstar Observatory, but you know what, I cannot make you do anything that you don't want to do. And the last few days what we've been trying to do is pull the duvet off you. I know it's going to expose some of you to, you know, something that's not very comfortable, the harsh, cold environment of truth. Yeah. What you've got to realise is that we have never seen corruption on the levels that we have witnessed over the last couple of years. They no longer care. It's clear that when energy costs went up, that the governments that allowed it to happen around the world were obviously at some point benefiting from that. Maybe their family members, so it couldn't be traced directly to them immediately, were in receipt of perhaps shares from these energy companies. And where were the governments there to protect us from these excess costs? And, you know, we know that they've made, you know, double the profits of what they usually do. And we know that the governments haven't intervened in any way other than use taxpayers' money to, you know, send to people directly where indirectly payments go back to the energy company. We know that they've done that, but they could have threatened those energy companies that if they didn't, tidy their act up, then, they are going to have their companies taken off them, or, they're going to face harsh tax levels that will punish the company. They've done nothing of the sort. And these energy companies' stock prices have soared as a result of their profits, and they've boasted about these profits. That they've had never had a time where they've had so much expendable cash around them. It is nothing more than a total letdown by the world's governments, and it should show you how much they will come to your assistance when you need them the most, because the money that we've paid all these governments in taxes has been a complete and utter waste. To this point in time, it has been badly spent, badly managed, and a lot of the time it ends up in fat, greedy people's back pockets. There's no two ways about it. I think you understand that. So what I'm saying is, it's clear. You don't need a crystal ball. When I say there will be tens of thousands of people dead in 6 months' time, the reason why I'm saying it is because last year it happened, the year before it happened, and the year before that it happened. What I'm trying to do this time round is get into people's heads and say to them, you know what, your property is worth less than your family. Get your priorities right. Get your facts, clear. Your priority is hopefully your family, your life, your family's life, your children's lives. They're more important than any property, than any cash in the bank, than any material object. And if you agree with me, and you still are living in an earthquake environment where the frequency of these earthquakes happen, then you are taking a gamble with everybody's trust at this point in time. And I think you need to rethink what you're doing. If you decide to stay, then you're just running a risk. That's why I can't understand why people live in San Francisco. It's overdue, a massive earthquake. It's just a matter of time. Why would you own property in a region like that? California is another place. Why would you live there when the risks are increasing every day of one of those large events to occur? Why would you do that? Well, again, we have tried to emphasise just two things. That if you live in an environment where these frequently happen, then you can take it to the bank that they will happen again. And the other thing is that you have a choice. You can stay in an environment where it's likely for an increase in earthquakes in magnitude and frequency, as well as all the other anomalies that can be calculated. It's your choice. What we're trying to do is help people see sense, nothing less than that. Guys, I want to thank our patrons, and for those people that chip in a few bucks on the link down there in the PayPal link. And again, a big shout out to Jim. You know what, I know what you've done, buddy, and I totally appreciate it. I just wish a few more people would appreciate it the same. And they can if they want to. And I'll just say this again, nothing is mandatory on our channel, but you do realise that if no one supports what we do, we can't do what we do. It's entirely up to you. All the money that you've given the governments over the years, what have you got out of it? Have you ever had honesty to start with? Well, let's start there, shall we? Guys, links down there if you want to help support us, and I'll say what I usually do. Bye for now.